good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to those in the American time zone. Welcome to Creator Toolbox, a show brought to you by the ServiceNow Developer Program channel by your lovely developer advocates, where we demo all the brand new features that ServiceNow has to offer. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you will see right by Pranav's head that we are doing Washington, D.C. content. So the Washington, D.C. release came out in early access on February 1st. And so now we are running through all the amazing new things it has to offer. This is just one in a myriad of things that we have been doing. So if this is the first thing you've seen, congratulations, there's more to learn. You can see the rest of that thank you so much, Pranav, at devlink.sn/Washington. Now we have a phenomenal guest here to walk us through the Now Platform SDK. But before that, let's do a quick lightning round of introductions. Like I think I already said, my name is Laura McManaman. I am one of our developer advocates, and I'll kick it over to the man to the right of me, Pranav.
Hey everyone, I'm also a senior developer advocate here at ServiceNow, and I'm going to pass it back to Patrick.
Hi everybody, really excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. My name's Patrick Wilson. I'm a software engineering director at ServiceNow. And I'm here to represent the ServiceNow SDK.
Well, we couldn't be more excited to have you. Patrick and his entire team, including Jay, are kind of suffering from their own success. We've kind of noticed that their new SDK is pretty much one of the most talked about features on social media that we've seen. So we've strapped them into a bunch of cool stuff. There's already an episode of Breakpoint where they kind of talk about the product's history, how it's kind of grown, and where it's going. So if you're interested in that, please check that out as well. And with that all being said, though, this is a visual medium. So today, we're not going to be podcasting. We are going to be showing you this brand new feature. So with that, I will kick this off with a question first, which is, what is the SDK? What is it? What is that as a feature?
Yeah, great question. So the ServiceNow SDK is effectively what it is it's a pro code tool, a CLI tool for building applications and scoped apps on the ServiceNow platform. So what the CLI is all about is it allows developers or anybody that's writing code and comfortable writing code to write code locally on their own machine. It provides a mechanism for taking that code that you're writing on your local machine and pushing it up and pulling it down from a development instance that you're working against, a ServiceNow instance you're working against. And it gives you some new capabilities that you haven't had before in the scripting layer in the ServiceNow platform. Two really big and interesting features, which is the ability for me to organize my code the way that I want to organize my code. So instead of being locked into, for example, maybe in your scoped app, you have a lot of business logic and you're taking all that business logic and you're dumping it all into one of some small number of script includes, and you're editing those script includes in the platform itself. And you don't really have any means to organize that code the way that you want to, or structure it into modules and submodules the way you'd like to. The ServiceNow SDK gives you a mechanism for doing that. And really exciting part of the SDK is it allows you for the first time to install and leverage third-party libraries from the Node ecosystem and from NPM in the applications that you're building on the platform. So over the course of the last few releases, and especially in the Washington release, we've put a lot of work into making our scripting engine, our Rhino scripting engine on the platform, more and more compatible with the wider JavaScript ecosystem, like the Node.js runtime, so that we can do things like pull in really useful third-party libraries and use them in our apps. That's libraries like Lodash or like Moment.js and more. So that's what the ServiceNow SDK is all about. It's something fun for pro coders.
So that's a really interesting way to also get people that have a strong, a traditionally strong JavaScript background to like dive more into ServiceNow. Like it kind of meets them halfway of like practices and software. Because you say you're using Visual Studio, which is like the industry standard. So it's nice to kind of meet people halfway with, not always having to do every single thing on ServiceNow too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something that we've heard from a lot of people. And I've built a lot of apps on the ServiceNow platform over 10 years. So, it's something I've always wanted, which is, I want to write code. I love that ServiceNow lets me write code and lets me write JavaScript on the platform. That's really cool. But I don't necessarily always love writing that JavaScript in a little script field in a form in a browser, right? That's not necessarily the experience that I always want. It can be really convenient if I just have to like, crank out a couple lines of JavaScript real quick for something that I'm working on. But for those cases and those times when I'm writing a lot of code and I'm building a lot of maybe rich business logic, it's nice to be able to use industry standard tooling to be able to do that. And that's sort of the path that we're converging on.
And offline too. Like you don't have to be on Wi-Fi now, essentially, right?
Sure. Yeah, you don't have to be. There's I'll show this when I'm using the CLI, but the only time that you really need an internet connection is if you're taking your changes and you're pushing them up to an instance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited to see it, Patrick. Like you mentioned about a couple of things, modular JS, Node.js, and I think I'm super excited. So can we see it now? Like, will you be showing us a more demo about it?
Yeah, would love to.
All right.
All right, cool. So I'll be kind of walking through sort of a flow of using the ServiceNow SDK to we'll create a new application together, and we'll start to get a feel for what the functionality of the SDK is, the different capabilities that it has, and what it feels like to actually use it. So over here on my screen, I'm showing first a quick plug for our documentation site. This is where you can learn about how to use the ServiceNow SDK, how to install the SDK. We'll walk through all of this together, so I won't show you to sit here with the documentation open, I suppose. And just kind of some table setting. I have an instance here set up. This is a Washington instance. So if you request like a PDI Washington instance or something like that, you'll be able to follow along as well. Everything that I'm about to show is only supported on Washington as the earliest release. So if you're on like Vancouver or something earlier, you won't be able to use the SDK until you make it to Washington. So I just want to set the table there. So we're showing a pro code tool, a CLI tool. So unlike most products in the ServiceNow space, our journey doesn't start here. Our journey will start right here. So here I've opened up a terminal, a command line interface here. And here I have displayed the command that you would run to install the ServiceNow SDK. I want to make a couple of notes here just really quickly because this is a little bit different than the way that ServiceNow typically ships software. So the ServiceNow SDK is shipped on the global NPM registry. Now, NPM is also called the Node Package Manager. If you're a JavaScript developer, you're familiar with NPM. That's where people take globally, across any company, take code and they put it for consumption. Third-party libraries and things go there. It's also a really convenient way to distribute software. And that's how we're distributing the ServiceNow SDK here. So if you want to install it, you could install it right now on your machine if you'd like to. It's there, it's available. You would run npm install -global at ServiceNow/SDK. And that's how you get the SDK. When you run this, I won't run it. I already have it installed. It does take a couple of minutes to pull down all the code sometimes. But this is how you can get the SDK installed on your machine. And once you've run that command and you're installing it globally, which means that anywhere on your machine, once you've installed it, you can run now-SDK. I'll say --help, which is a common pattern for CLI tools. And you'll see that you have the SDK installed on your machine. So this is what it's going to look like once you've installed it. And it even gives you kind of a helpful rundown of all the different commands that are available to you here, like how to authenticate, how to create new projects, etc. So that's how you get the ServiceNow SDK. There's always some questions about how do I get it? How do I play with it? It's really easy. You can do it right now if you'd like to. So from here, where to start? So let's start with authentication. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new application, a new scoped app, so we can start playing around with some things. Before you can create an app, you'll want to authenticate with an instance, probably the development instance that you'd like to use. Maybe it's a PDI, maybe it's something else. And to do that, we can run now-SDK auth. Now, what auth is it's our utility in the ServiceNow SDK for authenticating with different instances. You can set up different authentication profiles if you'd like. I think I already have one set up. Let's see, auth list. Now SDK, auth list. I do. I already have an instance set up. If I did not yet authenticate with this instance. In fact, we'll simulate that. Let's clear out our auth. So you can kind of manage your authentication profiles here. Now let's create a new one. Auth, I think it's save, default. There we go, target host. So this is where you'd start logging into the instance that you want to develop against. In this case, I'll type in my URL for the instance that I want to use, this weird looking URL that's an internal test URL for instances that we have here at ServiceNow. Here you'll log in. You'll log in with your basic authentication credentials. That's the authentication mechanism that the Now SDK supports as of right now. I'll log in as an admin. There we go. So once I've done that, I'll see that I'm fully logged in, and now I can start actually developing against my ServiceNow instance. Really easy. So this is still some of the boring stuff here. So let's get into some exciting stuff.
This is cool. I haven't seen this type of thing done with ServiceNow. Don't discount it. It's really
sorry, not boring. Really exciting.
And
very thrilling.
Really exciting stuff. And Patrick, like right now you created this app, like, can you show us what kind of artifacts that got created in ServiceNow backend?
Yeah.
So I haven't created anything yet. So far, what I've done is I've logged into my instance. Next, what I'll do is I will actually create a new application. Now that I'm all logged in, now that I'm connected to, it's this instance over here that I'm going to be connected to. So now that that's all set up, let's create an app. And that's where things start to really get exciting. So what I'll do is I'll run Now SDK create. And if I run --help, I'll see that there's a little overview here of how I can create my application, the different commands that are available to me. So I'll say Now SDK. And from here, I'll say create. I have to give it a project name. Let's call it SDK demo. I have to give it a scope name. With this, really important, make sure that you use your vendor prefix for scoped apps. Your instance, your development instance will have a vendor prefix that whatever instance that you develop on, that's the prefix that we use at the beginning of scope IDs. So make sure you use the right one here. If you don't, the Now SDK will let you know that you used the wrong one, so it's not a huge deal. But here I'll say SDK demo, and I will also add a flag here called sample table. So when I run this command, what it's going to do is it's going to go and talk to my instance. It's going to create and bootstrap a new application for me, a new scoped app for me. It's going to pull down all the artifacts from the instance that represent that scoped app. And with the help of this -- sample table flag, it's also going to bootstrap a table definition for me as well, which is really useful when we're just kind of playing around with things here. So I'll run that. We're bootstrapping the app. Here we can see that it's generating all the files that it needs to generate for the app. Now it's logging into my instance. It's deploying the package to my instance. And there we go. So we've successfully created an application. As easy as that. Let's take a look at it on the instance. We can navigate to this URL that it provides for me. We can use that to go and check it out. Here we go. So here's my app, the SDK demo app. Really awesome. And we can see that it's already created a bunch of application files for me. But I don't want to look at my application files in the instance. I'm using this pro code tool. I want to look at it in code. So what I can do is, from this point, now that my project is all created, I'll open it up in VS Code. You can use whatever mechanism you like for doing that. I have this handy little shortcut called code. You can configure that through VS Code. I'll open it up. And here we go. So here's my project, the Now SDK, this SDK demo app that I've created. If we look around here, we can see over here on the left that just by running that create command, a bunch of different files were created for me, right? And I can take these files, I can check them into Git, I can make a new Git repository in whatever Git provider that I like to use. Here internally, we use GitHub. Different customers may use different types of Git providers, of course. So consult your IT department about where you want to put source code. But these are the files that I would check into Git, right? And we kind of see some things that maybe look familiar if you're a JavaScript developer. If you've built JavaScript apps in the past, a lot of this will look pretty familiar to you. You've got this source folder, and in that source folder, we can see that the Now SDK created for me this myfunction.js file that already has some code inside of it. So that's useful. This gives me kind of a starting off point. I can see some other things. I've got my package.json file. This is where we can see kind of an overview of this application that I'm building. And this package.json, this is something that would look familiar to you if you've made any other, like a Node app, for example, anywhere else, right? And we can see that I've got some scripts set up. We'll use those. I don't have any dependencies yet, but we'll change that. And the third thing I want to call out here, and then I'll pause maybe for any questions, is this .metadata folder. So to talk about this .metadata folder, I want to give you kind of an understanding of what a ServiceNow scoped app is. And if you've done scoped app development, if you've ever checked a scoped application into Git before, like if you viewed like the source code for a scoped application, you'll recognize some of the things in here. It's a bunch of these XML files, right? These XML files represent metadata and artifacts that make up your ServiceNow application. So here I can see that I've already got one artifact here. It's this sys_script record. This happens to be a business rule. So if I can go and open up this business rule, if I go to, let's see, here's that sample table that I made. You'll recall that I typed -- sample table in the creation command here, and I can navigate to this table and we can take a look at our business rule. So here's my table, very fancy, very fun. I'll go to configure business rules, and here we can see the business rule for this table that was created kind of automatically as part of the
Are you, I just want to confirm something.
Yes.
Which screen are you currently showing? Are you still showing the My Function screen, or did things freeze?
Oh, I switched screens.
Okay, we lost you. So currently it still shows the source file, myfunction.js. There we go, perfect.
Is it good? Okay, I think there's a pretty severe lag on the.
There is a little bit, so I apologize on that one.
It's okay. Yeah, I'm seeing comments. It's not just me. No, it's not just you. I think there's just a delay in the screen share. So, but now you should see like the instance UI, right? Are you seeing that?
Yeah.
So I'll try and account for the fact that there's a little bit of a delay here. So now I'm looking at a business rule screen. Hopefully you see that. And here I can see, so I just wanted to pull this up to show that this is like the UI representation of that XML file that I was showing over here in VS Code land. And now I'm looking at VS Code. This is that business rule that I was showing. So we'll be flipping back and forth a little bit. Hopefully we're not seeing any more severe screen lag here. But this kind of the short version of this is that this .metadata folder in the generated code, in the source code for my SDK project, contains all of the ServiceNow stuff. It holds all the XML. It holds all of the artifacts that represent stuff, like my business rules, like my scripted REST ACLs, like my UI builder pages, whatever it is, it'll show up in this folder. We also have this source folder down here, and it's in this source folder where we're going to start defining JavaScript. So this is just a normal source folder. Its contents aren't XML. They're just a bunch of JavaScript files. And I can organize these JavaScript files whatever way I want. And I can import this content into my business rules, or really anywhere that I can execute server-side script. So let's see an example of that here. I'll kind of show you how everything sort of plumbs together here. And then we'll start actually writing some code, and we'll start getting a sense of what it feels like to actually author some code here. So here in myfunction.js, this is created for me very helpfully by the SDK, just as a little starter script so we can see how things are wired up. And we can see here that I'm defining a function called show status update. And I'm doing a few things inside of here. I'm using GS, which I'm importing from the ServiceNow/glide package. This is where we keep and publish all of the like type definitions and everything for ServiceNow APIs so that you can use them in your code here. And here I'm just logging out a couple of info messages just to kind of show how this is plumbed and how it all works. I want to import this show status update function into my business rule. And luckily, if I flip over to my business rule, we'll see that that's already happened. So now I'm showing the business rule screen on the form in ServiceNow UI. Okay. And here we can see this line of code right here. And maybe I'll bump this screen size a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. Here we can see like the new addition to the ServiceNow JavaScript runtime. This is like a new feature in Washington, which is the ability to require content that I've defined in as part of the ServiceNow SDK as a module. So this is like a new scripting runtime API that we've created, this require statement. And you would only use this statement if you're using the ServiceNow SDK to build and manage a scoped application that you're working on. But here we can see this require.source/myfunction.js. So this is a common JS import statement. And the file that I'm importing is the file path that I was showing in the ServiceNow SDK. That was the contents of that source file, right? Source/myfunction.js. And here I'm pulling out of it this show status update function. And now that I've imported it, I can actually use it in my, in this case, it's a business rule, but I could use it in a script include. I could use it in a scripted REST API, really anywhere that you see a script block and that script executes on the server side. You can use this new require statement to import these modules that you're defining, which is really awesome. And if I try and use this thing, so we'll go to my table. I'll open it up in a new tab here. So here's that custom table that was created. The business rule is sitting on top of this. I'll create a new record just really quickly.
Hang on, it's catching up. There we go. Okay, now we're caught up.
Okay. This is just a basic little table. So I'll just say status whip and task is test. Just like a little to-do list, basically.
Yeah.
And now if I make a modification to this, like maybe I'll set this to done. Awesome. We'll see that the business rule fires. It imports that script and it logs out record updated. The old status was whip and the new status is done. And that's being logged by, if I flip back over to VS Code, that's being executed from this code that's here. So now we can kind of see how the ServiceNow instance and server script on the ServiceNow instance connects back to this code that I'm writing here. And it all kind of gets stitched together through those require statements. Pranav, you asked a question a really long time ago about what are the artifacts that are actually created here. Those are the artifacts that get created here. Any other questions?
Sorry.
Sorry.
It scared me to see my own face that big. Sorry.
Yeah, that was me. I thought of putting Patrick. So Patrick, right now I don't see a lot of question. One common question that I'm seeing is like in the documentation there is a version of Node.js that is mentioned, right? So should we use that, or can we use the latest version also?
You can use so you can use any version of Node.js as long as it's relatively recent. Like if you're using like any version of Node that's on like long-term support, you should be fine. We late identified a bug that we're going to be fixing in the next patch, where you do get like a warning when you install the ServiceNow SDK. If you install it with the latest node, everything still works. It's still functional. We just log a warning. It's because of like a misconfigured Node.js like minimum version flag in our actual project. The only thing I can say about that is sorry. We'll do better. But we will be fixing that in the next patch, and that's actually maybe something useful to talk about here. Over time, we'll be releasing updates to the ServiceNow SDK, and because we're deploying those updates over NPM, we're not like bound to the family release schedule or anything. So when a new family release comes around, like let's say that what's after Washington, Xanadu. When Xanadu comes out, you know, that's not like, you know, oh, I have to wait until Xanadu to get like a new version of the SDK. In fact, we'll be shipping, it'll be minor, but like minor updates to the ServiceNow SDK at a regular cadence between now and then. So, you know, you can regularly check back to NPM, the site where we're hosting this SDK, and you can check for new version updates. And very often, like if you're having some sort of an issue, we may have fixed that issue in the form of a bug fix and released a new patch for it. So that's one thing that we'll be fixing, but you can use latest node. It will work. You'll get a little warning message that says, uh-oh, you shouldn't use this, and you can ignore it. That'll go away. Good question.
Awesome. And Patrick, like how we can switch an application? I know there should be a command. Like for example, I'm working on application A and I want to go to application B. Like how we can do the switch? Is there any command to do a switch?
So the application that you built here, this source code, currently a ServiceNow SDK project is backed by a single scoped application. So everything that I'm writing here, like if I created new like JavaScript files, for example, right? Those will be a part that the metadata that gets shipped to the instance will be scoped with this scoped app. So it'll be a part of this scoped app. So there's no real notion currently in the ServiceNow SDK of like switching app scopes or anything. Like this is the one app scope that you were working with. And that's kind of an important thing I want to call out about how the ServiceNow SDK is behaving, at least in this release, is that there's kind of a one-to-one mapping between a scoped application and a ServiceNow SDK app. So you can't make a ServiceNow SDK app that's like that encompasses multiple scopes currently. You know, I'm interested in hearing, you know, what the audience or what other folks think about that, and if that's something that they'd be interested in, maybe we can do something about that in a future release. But currently, that's the way that this works. There's no real notion of like switching scopes or anything like that.
Gotcha, because there is a normal notion for developers, like when I'm working as a developer inside ServiceNow instance, I can easily switch the scope and do a client script in a different scope or move to a global one. That's why that kind of switching thing came up. And the second question is like, Patrick, this is something like I'm also interested in. It's like how we can create columns for a particular table. If you have a table that's created, how we can add columns. I think in the my function like you have. So how we can add those things? Can you show that?
Yeah, totally. So there's and actually that's a really good segue. So thank you. I'll maybe instead of showing it through table, I'll show you through like maybe we'll make a modification to this business rule, and we'll see kind of what that flow looks like in the ServiceNow SDK, and that would apply to really anything that you make on the instance, whether that's like schema updates or like business rule updates or anything else. The flow will be the same. So I'll kind of show it to you that way. So here we have my source code, which I'm editing here. And then I have this .metadata folder, which contains, right? From here, let's say that I want to make a modification to this business rule. So in this case, it's maybe I want to change the name. We'll do something basic. In order to do that, what I'll do is I'll edit this record. So to edit this record, click here. Now I'm editing it in the context of my scope, right? So far everything feels pretty familiar. We'll call this ServiceNow SDK business rule, something like that. And I will save my record. Okay, so I've made a modification to this record on the ServiceNow instance.
I don't think anything is. I think it might be some internet issues on your side, Patrick, because we're also using more video a bit. Nothing is updated yet on the screen at all.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Is my video and everything okay, or is it?
It looks like you're in a cloud. It's very foggy. It's like it won't focus.
Yeah, that's my camera. Sometimes my camera will just decide to go blurry. It's not an internet thing.
Could you perhaps stop sharing and try sharing again?
Yeah. Let's try it. I'll stop screen. Okay. Yeah, I see that my camera's. There we go. Okay. Sometimes I go back and forward and then it refocuses, but let's try one more time. Share screen.
It happens.
No worries. Can't control the internet.
All right, share that. I guess that's the risk of live streams, right?
Yeah. There we go. Now we see the business rule screen. Is that
okay? Now I'm scrolling. Do you see that?
Yes. Yeah. That's
great. That might fix it. Yeah. There's also some audio issues. I don't know if it's from my side or it. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. So getting back on track. So what we were doing was we were making a modification to this business rule. I might have done it off screen, but all I did was I changed this name of this business rule and I saved the record. That's all I've really done so far. So now I will flip back to VS Code where I have my local source code, and this is in like my local file system, right? And if I go back over to this XML file, I'll see that it didn't change, right? It says that the name of the business rule is still log item change. So like I've made some modifications on the instance and I haven't pulled them down into my local file system yet. So that's what we'll do. And I'll show what that looks like. So from here, I'm in the root directory of my project here. And if I run now-SDK fetch, I'll just log --help to start so that we can see what's in here. We can see that we have this utility that will download application metadata and update the local metadata folder. So what that's saying is it's going to go and talk to the instance. It's going to take all of the changes that have happened in my scoped application since the last time I fetched. It's going to pull down those changes in the form of like XML records, and it's going to update this metadata folder. So by fetching, that's how I get my local source code here up to date with what the latest is in terms of the work that I've done on the instance, because I don't want to author these XML files by hand, right? I want to like use like the UI or something to edit these business rules and table definitions and everything else. So what I'll do is I'll run now-SDK fetch. That's going to talk to my instance. It's going to download everything, and a bunch of stuff came in. So these are all of the XML records that are associated with the scoped app that I'm working on. Really since the last time that I've run a fetch, right? And in here, we'll see this syscript record has been pulled down as part of it. Really, it was already there. So what we did was we pulled down an update to the to this syscript record. And inside of here, we can see, here we go, that this name is different now. So now the name is ServiceNow SDK business rule. And that's the change that I've made on the instance. So now what we start to kind of get a feel for is, you know, I can do work locally on my machine. I'm probably writing and editing JavaScript files locally on my machine here in this source folder, because this is a great interface for writing code. And then I'm pushing it up to the instance. And then when I'm doing things on the instance, like updating my table definitions or updating whatever it is, right? Then I can run a fetch and that'll pull those changes back down again. And my source code always stays up to date. So if I took this and I checked it into Git, someone else could pull it down and they'll have all the same kind of state of the application that I have here. So we've shown pulling down changes. We haven't showed pushing up changes yet. So let's make a modification to our JavaScript file. In this case, maybe I'll say gs.add info message, hello world, something like that. So I'm adding a new info message here in my source code, and I'm going to save this. I want to build these changes and I want to push these changes up to the instance, and we'll kind of get a feel for what that looks like. Real quick though, before I do that, one kind of cool thing, I don't want to breeze through this too fast, is because I'm importing these ServiceNow APIs from NPM, or at least I'm importing the type definitions for them. This gives me all this really nice IntelliSense, which is pretty cool. So I can write like, you know, right here, it fills in for me that Glide System, this is the Glide System API, has this method on it called add info message, and I can hit enter and create it, which is really useful for like authoring code locally. You know, I don't necessarily have every ServiceNow app memorized. I'm sure, you know, there's probably at least a couple of people on this call who do. I don't. And this helps me kind of remember what APIs are available to me and remember the names and what the parameters of them are and everything like that, which is super useful. See, in this case, I can see that add info message takes a message parameter, which is of any type really. And I can say, this is my test, something like that. I have a really loud keyboard. I think you can hear it through the...
That's okay. Hey, everybody's moving like lightning now, so no complaints from me.
Oh, I think stopping and starting the screen share like got StreamYard to like fix it or something. I don't know. So that's awesome. Anyway, so we've added this line. So let's check it out now. Let's say, so I've saved this file. Now what I want to do is run now SDK build. So the CLI, really, it's just a fancy build process, right? And if you've done like any other development in like basically any programming environment, you'll be familiar with this notion of a build step. What a build step is it takes an input, in this case, it's our source code, right? And it turns it into some sort of a build output, which in our case is an artifact that we can install in a ServiceNow instance. It's all that XML and stuff. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a sec. So I'll run now SDK build. It's going to initiate the build process. It's lightning fast because it's building very little code. But there we go. Now I'm all built. Real quick, what I'll do is I'll deploy this and we'll see it working. And then I'll show you a little bit of what happened when we ran that build command for anyone that's interested. So I'll run now SDK. This is the final command that I think we'll talk about today, which is deploy. And what deploy does is it takes that thing that I just built and it will ship it off to the instance that I'm logged into so that it can install, and then I can see my code actually running. So I'll run now SDK deploy, logs into the instance, deploys the package, and bam. So now it's deployed. What I would expect is if I come back over here to my business rule, or actually I'll go to my table definition because that script is still being run from my business rule. I'll set this maybe back to work in progress. Here we go. So now I'm logging hello world. So that's what it looks like to like build some new changes and then ship them off to the instance.
That's amazing. That is so, so cool. I'm loving this.
It feels good. It's really nice to be able to write, like my whole career, I've been a JavaScript developer. So it's really nice to be able to, on a ServiceNow, it's like still doing ServiceNow app development, but now I get to like write some source code as part of that as well. Any questions here? I can talk a little bit about maybe what was produced here, or should I talk a little bit about third-party libraries and stuff?
I see a couple of questions.
I think we are good.
Oh.
Go ahead, Pranav.
Go ahead, Lauren. No, I was just about to say, like, we can probably show the third-party application also, because third-party modules, how it can be there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's flip over to that. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. There was maybe just like one or two that I want to just quickly kind of address here. There was one about, is it or will it be possible to directly create business rules and script includes from the CLI? I think that's a really awesome question. Currently, it is not. So currently in the Washington release of the ServiceNow SDK, there's kind of two worlds that you're living in, right? There's the world where you're writing your source code, you're writing your JavaScript, and we'd like that world to be in VS Code. That's the right kind of environment to be doing that. And then there's this other world you're in, which is where I'm like creating business rules and script includes and doing other stuff that represents like the ServiceNow entities that I typically edit or create. Those things happen on the instance. And right now there's almost like a firewall between them, right? Where it's like, you do the instance stuff on the instance, you do the code stuff in VS Code. In the future, something we're working on, I can't like commit to things like delivery timelines and things, but something that we would like to see happen on some timeline is the ability to kind of bring those worlds together and say like, what I want is like a single experience for authoring everything about a ServiceNow application and code, right? Like I don't want to leave VS Code. I don't even necessarily want to leave code in order to do things like define business rules and define tables and all that kind of stuff. That's something that we're aware of. it is a direction that we would like to evolve the ServiceNow SDK, you know, non-committal language about like when things like that will come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my answer there. Safe harbor, safe harbor, safe harbor. Thank you. Yeah, I saw a comment about
that. Thank you. You're backing us up on
that. Cool. Let's do some third-party libraries. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. So, you know, at the beginning of this, I kind of said, hey, like one of the really awesome things that we want to be able to do here is pull in and use third-party libraries from like the NPM ecosystem. So I'm going to show an example of that. I'm going to show that example with, you know, like I said, I've been a JavaScript developer for a really long time. And in that time, one package that I've become pretty dependent on, I would say, in the code that I write day to day is a package called Lodash. For those that aren't familiar, Lodash is like your like Batman utility belt for writing JavaScript. It's a library that contains lots and lots of like utilities inside of it, basically. I've even seen people in the ServiceNow space like build their own like utility libraries that ends up overlapping quite a lot with the functionality of Lodash. And I love using it in applications that I build. I haven't been able to ever use it in like a ServiceNow app that I write, at least on the server side. And that's fixed. So we can do that now. So I'll show an example of what that looks like. From here, from my VS Code, down here in the bottom, I'm typing into the terminal. I'll run npm install Lodash. So that's all I got to do, right? This is how I'd install like a third-party library in any Node project or JavaScript project, not just this one. But I'd run npm install Lodash. There we go. It installed. Real quick, we'll show what happened there. I'll click over into my package.json, and we can see that we've pulled in a dependency on Lodash now. So now we can see that this Lodash dependency was pulled in. And now what I'll do is I will use it in my code. So from here, in my function.js, I'll write import. Let's see, there's a function in here called uppercase. I'm just typing and it's already kind of filling in the suggestions coming from Lodash, which is really awesome. But I'll hit enter there, import uppercase from Lodash. And now what I'll do is like I'll convert this hello world to uppercase. There we go. So now what would happen is I'm using this Lodash utility. It's kind of a boring utility, but you know, it's a nice one to convert this hello world text to the uppercase version of hello world. So now what I'll do is I've made some changes to my JavaScript, right? So that means I got to build now SDK build. There we go. We're building. We can see that we're building Lodash here now too. So what we're doing is we're packaging up Lodash, the dependency, and putting it onto the instance. Now I'll run SDK deploy. Gotta deploy my changes. There we go. It's taking all that stuff and it's pushing it up to the instance for me. Now if I flip back over here and I make another modification, here we go. Hello world. So right there, we can see, oh my gosh, I'm like using a third-party library, which is very, very nice for me, at least as a developer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, you know, of course, we support more libraries than just Lodash. I'll show another example of another library that we can use here. And then I'll also say a few words about the limitations that we have currently in Washington around like third-party libraries, which is a common question. Gotcha. So I'll run, let's install one more thing. So I'll run npm install moment. Moment.js is a popular JavaScript library for doing like datetime related things. And I can npm install moment there. And then I can say import moment from moment. Here we go. And now what I'll do is I'll say egs.add info message. How do I do this? It's moment dot, you know what? When in doubt, look at the documentation.
Hey, you do it, man.
I don't have everything memorized, unfortunately. Here we go. I can do this. So I'll copy paste that code in there. save that, npm run build, and npm run deploy. npm run is just how I invoke scripts in the package.json file. It's like a nice little shortcut. Here I've mapped it to now SDK build and SDK deploy. So I'll do that. I'll build. It's building moment. It's polyfilling the things it needs to polyfill. It's deploying the package to my instance. There we go. Now if I come back over here, I can see, bam, that it is Tuesday, and that's coming from Moment. So Moment has all sorts of like really nice little APIs and utilities for doing daytime related things.
And
like
we need to help this now because date stuff is the hardest.
Right. Any questions? I'll pause there.
I think one question came up, like Patrick, it's like a third-party modules don't get bundled if you have tsconfig.json file in your root. Is it something like how? That's one question that came up about. I'm not aware of like what's the tsconfig.json file.
So TypeScript is, I haven't really talked about TypeScript too much, but TypeScript is, of course, a popular language and compiler for writing typed JavaScript. You can use it with the Now SDK. It requires kind of some setup out of the box, and that setup can be kind of nuanced. This is a question that I have heard once before, which is like, hey, like, you know, there seems to be some like finickiness to like actually getting TypeScript to play nicely with the ServiceNow SDK. Basically, the way that it ends up getting set up is that you'd use TypeScript kind of in front of the SDK. So first, you'd use TypeScript to turn your TypeScript files into JavaScript files, and you'd use the TypeScript compiler for that, which you have to like set up basically on your own as part of your project. And then you'd use the ServiceNow SDK to take that outputted JavaScript and send it to the instance. That's something that we can certainly dig into. I think that something we're probably missing here is a good like example of like TypeScript actually hooked up and wired up end to end, published somewhere like GitHub so that people can like reference it as like, here's kind of a configuration of TypeScript that is fully functional with the Now SDK. That's something that we can maybe dig into offline, and I'll follow up on that in the comments after the call.
I see another good question, which is if the documentation doesn't answer a question yet, or if it hasn't just been flushed out, is there a place where questions can be asked by customers about this new product?
I think the ServiceNow community is probably a really great place to start.
Yay, that's the right answer. It was a trick question. Yeah, so the service community.servicenow.com is the hub for not only just things like our developer blog, but also for getting help from external peers as well as internal peers. So I highly encourage anyone that has extraneous questions to post them there.
Yeah. Absolutely. You can, of course, always reach out to me if you'd like to. I'm Patrick Wilson on LinkedIn. I'm the only Patrick Wilson at ServiceNow that I can tell. So if you type Patrick Wilson ServiceNow, you'll find me, and love to connect and hear about, you know, how other people are using this stuff, of course, too. So that's another place that you could reach out to, is you can reach out to me, at least until such a time where hopefully this is so popular that I just can't field all the messages anymore.
Like, you might regret putting that in a video. Really?
And Patrick, that was like that was great. Like, I have a personal question about it. Like, what's coming in future? Like, anything that you'd like to share about it? And I'm gonna put a safe harbor banner while you talk.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So I won't say anything kind of about like specific timelines or specific release delivery vehicles or for anything like that. We're working on a lot of really exciting stuff. Like, we kind of see this as the start of like the ServiceNow SDK. So this is like, you know, this is V1, right? This is like day one of the SDK. And there's a lot of things that we want to do with this in taking it forward. A few of the ideas that we have that we're kind of in various stages of working through is something I was talking about earlier, which is this notion that you know, I'd like to be able to define more than just script locally. Like, I'd like to also be able to have a mechanism for defining the ServiceNow content that I define as part of my app ideally without even leaving VS Code, like an in-code way of being able to do those things. That's something that we're interested in. We're also interested in, expanding our support of the Node.js ecosystem. That's something that we're really interested in. So, I want to kind of, as part of this answer, give a few caveats to our third-party library support that we have right now. We are always trying to increase the compatibility of our scripting layer in ServiceNow with what you'd find in Node.js. We're not at 100% compatibility yet. There are things that are missing. And for those things that are missing that third-party libraries depend on, it means that those libraries won't work in a ServiceNow context. The big ones are any Node.js native APIs. So for a good example of this is like the file system API or the HTTP API. These are things that are natively available in Node.js. So sometimes libraries depend on them. We don't have them available in our scripting runtime yet. So you won't, any library that's using those things, it won't work. But like we try and polyfill as much as we can, but something that, and another example of that is like asynchronous JavaScript support. So promises, async await, these kind of like asynchronous features, we don't have support for those yet in the ServiceNow engine. So in terms of what's coming in the future, we'd like to expand that, right? Like the more types of these APIs and runtime capabilities we can support in the scripting engine, the more third-party libraries that we can support as a result. So that's something that, what I'm hoping is that we'll see kind of a convergence story, like between our runtime and runtimes that you'd be used to using out there in the wild. So those are a couple of things specific to the SDK that we're thinking about.
I also see one final question that says, it's a very interesting one. So I kind of want to hear the group's opinion on this. This is really exciting to see such a pro code feature get such amount of like spotlight and funding. And obviously like this is like a big part of the Washington release. And they're asking, how does this mesh with ServiceNow's recent focus on low and no code?
Yeah.
And so if anything, I want to take a little bit of stab at it because Pranav and I work in the marketing department, right? And so we see, I think that a lot of the push for low and no code isn't necessarily that ServiceNow hasn't been working on pro code. It's more so that received probably an unfair amount of the marketing, right? These are features that, especially in the tech ecosystem, are extremely hot. People are wanting to expand and diversify who can call themselves a developer. And so I think that naturally a lot of them, the spotlight goes to those features to make sure people know that they exist, right? So I think that internally, from a product management standpoint, though, each pillar kind of stands independently and equally of low, no, and then pro. Would you agree with that, Patrick, or is that like totally off base?
No, I would. I mean, of course, like ServiceNow invests quite a lot and very heavily in the low code and the no code tools, and I think they're really great. Like I've worked on them in the past. Yeah. Like in a past life at ServiceNow, I've worked on UI Builder, on Service Portal, on like all sorts of things that are low code and no code tools. When I think about kind of the pro code side of the story, when I look at ServiceNow, I feel like I've always seen it like, a development platform. Like I've always been able to write code in ServiceNow, right? Like kind of to your point, like that's something that's always been possible. Every time I go to Knowledge or meet customers, meet developers, most of them are probably writing at least some code. Some of them are writing a lot of code. Some of the people on this call have probably written a lot of code that are listening in. So I see this as like I don't see this as like a new, like, oh, like we're pushing into a new space now. Like really what I see is like, we're giving better tooling and better support to the people who are doing the stuff that they've been doing on the ServiceNow platform since like 2003. So that's kind of how I think about it. So I totally agree with you, Lauren.
Oh, yeah, glad I'm not totally out in space.
And I think, I was just saying one thing about it. Like I talk to a lot of pro developers who are not part of ServiceNow ecosystem. They are doing things outside of ServiceNow system. And this particular SDK, when I talk to my friends now, they say like, yeah, we are doing this for years now, as Patrick mentioned, and Lauren, you also mentioned about it. Like, so this will reduce the gap for those pro code developers to come on ServiceNow and build stuff, because they don't have to learn everything from scratch now. Business rules, all these things, they can use the same knowledge that they have for the way they are developing things using Node.js or different more JavaScript libraries, and use that knowledge and create apps on ServiceNow. So it's about like reducing the path for them to come up and try the platform.
Yeah, totally agree. That's something I'm excited to see is like, I want to open up the ServiceNow platform as a development target for more types of people, the types of people who have been writing JavaScript for other ecosystems, and they want to bring some of that to our platform. That's something I'm particularly excited about. So I don't see it as like it's not an either or thing in my mind. Like, I think like I'd like to execute really well on all of it. That's what I think ServiceNow should do.
And they're different teams too, frankly. So it's not like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're all different teams working on these products. So it's not like you're diverting the attention of a singular team to work on one or the other. So that's kind of nice to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out in like the low code and no code space, of course, as well. So yeah, this is an area where I think it all coalesces, in one strategy.
Well, we're so happy to have you on this call. Like what you showed us was it was great. Not to discount the podcast, because the podcast was really, really interesting to learn about the history and the trajectory of the product, but being able to see it in action is definitely something really, really spectacular. So thank you for following up and doing an additional piece of content for us. It really means a lot, Patrick. Do you have any final words or anything where people can come find you if they have questions or if you'd like feedback?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can, if you'd like to, you could shoot me an email, patrick.wilson@servicenow.com. Again, I'm the only Patrick Wilson at ServiceNow, so you'll get me. No, I'm excited to, we're going to keep working on this stuff. I'm excited to maybe come back on the show at some point and show some new stuff.
Do you have any knowledge content perhaps that could be plugged, or is that still under wraps until a little bit later?
I'm not sure what I am, and I'm not allowed to say about that.
Fair. Tune in like April-ish, whatever, April, May-ish, when those.
Yeah, there's talks of CreatorCon stuff. So I'm not totally sure. I think they're still working out a bunch of stuff like behind the scenes on that, but I've heard rumblings of CreatorCon stuff. So maybe like, when the schedule comes out, check out the CreatorCon schedule, and you might see some SDK stuff there.
Perfect. And everyone gave a huge round of applause to all the switching and camera work that Prana has been doing this whole time and highlighting all the comments and stuff like that. So huge round of applause to him as well. Thank you all for joining us here today. I want to also remind you that, while the SDK is probably one of the #1 features of the whole release, there's a lot of other cool stuff too. We've got more YouTube live streams, so you can either go to our YouTube channel and click notify on the ones that you would like a notification for, or you can just go to our larger content calendar at devlink.sn/Washington or Washington, D.C. Both work. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking with you this morning. I will give you 2 minutes back, or I guess 1 minute back for your day, and hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.